Hi there, my name is Pham and I'm an Australian sound designer, sound artist and sound researcher. Welcome back to another episode of Sounds Unheard, and in fact it's the fourth and final episode in my run so far. You may have heard me mention briefly or hint briefly in a couple of the last few episodes that I'm going to take you today on a field trip and show you basically the process of taking field recordings. This is just an example of it and a really brief one. So not everything will be showcased, but it's going to just show you the first couple of steps that you can take for listening to sounds around you and then taking sounds and also collecting sounds as you go about your everyday, or if you're going out on a specific field trip to do this, how to do that, and then how I begin to organize my digital workspace in order to turn the sounds I've collected into a sound work or a soundscape, and the different techniques of listening that I use to be able to make that happen. So, because actually we're leaving this kind of interior studio space today, I will show you what I generally bring with me, and also the other alternatives, particularly if you do not have access to the equipment that I happen to have with me today. So the first thing I actually pack is the thing I'm using now to record, which is my DSLR camera. That might sound weird because, I mean, it almost has nothing to do with sound, even though it does have a microphone attached to it. I actually take the camera so I make sure that I keep a record of where I'm taking sounds from, the location. It's also a useful way for me to kind of like look back and remember things, because often I have a good sense of the sounds I collected from a particular place if I can see it. So that's a useful one. You don't need to bring a DSLR if you have one. Any old camera will do. Your phone camera, in fact, more often than not, I'll use that if I decided to spontaneously collect a sound that I heard and I don't have my camera on me. So that's equipment piece number one. Number two is the microphone itself. So for me, I like using this particular Zoom because it came in this handy dandy box, which makes it very good for field recordings, is the Zoom H6N for anyone out there who's interested in the model number. But again, just like the camera, you don't actually need to bring specific sound equipment if you don't have access to it or if it's too expensive. When I first started out, for the first, I'd say 2 years, a lot of my work was actually done with my iPhone. So I would just use the voice recording app and then come home and process it through another free to use app like Audacity that was freely available to me, and that actually works just fine. Just like with the DSLR, if I'm just out in the street and I hear something I like, I'm probably not gonna have this huge microphone with me at all times, so I'm probably gonna use my phone anyways. So don't worry if you don't have a ready to go like field microphone, you can still do this. Right, but I'll show you what's in the inside of this. So the case, we open it up, it has the microphone body itself. This one's particularly useful because if you're doing any other kind of extensive work, it has the capability here of adding more cables, more microphones, etc. It has two tops, one for XY settings, which actually I quite like using that, but for today's exercise I am going to use this microphone head, just because it brings in, at least for me when I'm listening back to it, it has more of that kind of outside sensation or more of an ambient field recording. So you're going to see me pull this out a bit later. Also in this kit is something if you're particularly interested in taking recordings outside, which is pretty important, particularly if, and I'll show you later, the weather today is not the best, so it could be a little windy, a little windshield. So that lets you take close-up recordings, or if you actually want to make a note with your voice, it doesn't cloud your sound recording with heaps of those whooshing, annoying, windy sounds that sometimes you get when you're, for example, talking to someone on the phone outside and listening through the microphone. Anyway, so that's really the basics of the kit. Don't forget your SD card for your camera or your microphone if you happen to be using it. I have done that, so that's always a useful tip. So, one other thing I always bring with me is, very old-fashioned I know, a notebook and a pencil. And the reason for this, similar to the reason why I bring the DSLR, is just to make a record of what I've taken. If you use a microphone like a Zoom, I'm sure you'll notice when you go back and upload the files to your computer, it just kind of has Zoom file 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you don't necessarily know like, oh, I was looking for birdsong for this section, I was taking a recording of this, etc., etc. So I like to keep a notebook and keep kind of a record of where all the sounds have come from. And this particular notebook has travelled with me across several archaeological excavations and expeditions where I was taking extensive recordings. So I mean, I have quite a lot of old records there from digs and expeditions in 2017, 2018, so it's my handy dandy notebook. So please do keep that on you. It will make your life at the other end when you're processing the sound, and you should be having more space and energy towards creativity and making music and making soundscapes and whatever it is you wish to do. Having something like this or any way of record keeping will just free up your mind so that all that creative juices and all that energy can be flowing through that part of your work. And if you're really keen when you're out there and you really want to check if the recording you've taken is good enough, you can just play back on your phone. But if you're like me and you're a little bit kind of nervous about playing loud sounds in public, I bring out a set of headphones. And these are pretty good. They're not noise cancelling, they're AKGs. But it's just a good way of double checking that the recording you've taken is to the quality that you want, and sometimes to the length that you want, or it's picked out a certain element in the sound that you're looking to resonate in the recording. So another handy thing. And that's pretty much it. Just a backpack and a good pair of shoes and we're ready to go.
Okay, so this is just the ambient recording taken from the T-junction of Galerie Sud at point G. Okay, so the microphone was held pointing upwards 90 degrees to the walkway. It was directly beneath this low pass, which is, I'd say, 2.5 meters high. I'm going to take a second ambient recording at this point, but just moving 30 centimeters to the east, which unlocks the cavity above me. A ceiling, I'd say, is about 6 meters high. Yeah. The microphone was held for both recordings equal to my height. So the top of the microphone will be 1 meter and 65 centimeters high.
Okay, so we're outside about half an hour later, and I'm just gonna do a walk maybe for like an hour or two just around Paris, and we're gonna take some recordings in the city and hopefully take some recordings in a park. And yeah, I'm gonna take you along with me. Okay, hi. So now we're back from the field trip, and it took me about between 2 to 3 hours to kind of collect everything that we needed. I've had a quick listen through so that we can begin kind of working on how this looks like as a workspace, so that you can skip all the administration. But essentially, I listened through what was appropriate to use, and some of the recordings, as always with field recordings, weren't that great, so I discarded those. And with the ones left, which are a nice clean 10 recordings from today's trip, I just took the liberty in this little gap between being out on the streets and being now at home, and transcribed the kind of list I took in the notebook and labeled all the files. So we're soon going to move on to that, and showing you kind of the workspace and how I flow through the beginnings of working digitally to make sound and to make sound art and write music. But before I get there, I wanted to kind of touch on some frameworks before we actually start making music. So in episode 2, where I kind of went through the different modes of listening that I've gone through in my practice and how that informs my work, and I use those phrases listening backwards, which is something last week we kind of delved really deeply into, how we can look at archive and look at historical instruments and look at the practices of archaeoacoustics to kind of draw out sound, and how we can continue to use that as a basis to make new music now, to share new music now, and also to kind of reimagine what the past could sound like. And the second half of episode 2, I kind of mentioned the kind of work I'm doing now, the kind of work that is about listening now in order to listen forwards and into the future. And the kind of research I'm interested now in is under the banner of bioacoustics. And bioacoustics, as a quick summation, is a field that looks at the world of biology, but looks at it through the lens of sound, hence bioacoustics. So for me, a lot of that work has been about looking at animal behavior, and in particular, two things: how animals use sound to communicate, and that could be vocally, that could also be through the use of other tools or instruments, and by instruments I mean, for example, the way that chimpanzees drum to communicate long distance, to things like birdsong. So that's one part of it. And the other half is how animals navigate the world through sound. How do they react to it? How does that inform their behavior? And it's kind of like looking at the research that James and I did about resounding. In essence, even though these things seem scientific and they seem to ask these really big, lofty questions that seem disconnected with making music and making art, the interesting thing is these research questions at their crux kind of allow me to inform the works that I'm going to make, or inform the sound world and soundscapes that I'm interested in inviting you or audiences into. So resounding was kind of the looking backwards version of it, but bioacoustics kind of lets me look at the world around us, listen to the ecology around us, the environment around us, nature, animals, other people, and think about how we can transform those sounds, in particular field recordings, into these more immersive, kind of grotesque, a little bit beautiful, a little bit alien, these whole immersive soundscapes. And a lot of the work that I've been doing recently and am going to continue doing kind of pushes our ears into transforming things that seem familiar into something super weird and alien. Alright, now, so moving in from that research, we're gonna see what we can do together with what I have. As you can see, this is a really simple setup. I literally just have a laptop. I don't even have fancy speakers for now. It's because it's the first stage. So now that you've seen what this could potentially become, I'm just going to show you the beginnings of that process, kind of like with what I did with the sound paintings. But we're going to translate what could be a sound painting onto like a digital workspace. And you can kind of tell here that the workspace is really simple. I just have a laptop. It doesn't have to be a Mac, but for me it happens to be a Mac. And for me, at the moment, I just pulled up the kind of proprietary software that comes with your Mac, which is Logic Pro X. I will provide like a little list of other softwares that you can try out, or like basic sound production ones. Logic is paid for and is a license. You don't actually need that. There are some amazing pieces of software out there like Audacity that you can use that basically allow you to look and order and cut sound in very different and experimental ways. So you don't actually have to go out there and pay a lot for a license unless that is something that you're interested in pursuing long term as part of your music making. Okay, so this is what the workspace looks like. It's pretty clean at the beginning. I've gone through here and kind of labeled the tracks here just so that I can keep track of what's going on. Again, it's not super detailed because it's just something I'm beginning to work with. And, you know, as we begin to build the layers of this piece and kind of build the shape of the soundscape, I'm going to go back and add annotations and things like that. But for now, this is kind of roughly what I have. And you can see that I've divided kind of the sounds of what I remember that I've taken on the field recording this morning. All right, so we're going to pull up our files. As I mentioned before, I've already gone through the liberty here of labeling everything. I have a nice, pretty round number of 10 that we've taken. So actually, it's quite a lot of material to work with in terms of audio. So we've got some ambient sounds, like gravel crunching. You probably saw me taking that recording up close. Different streets that I've different streets that I walked on. Busking sounds that I passed but I didn't film, so apologies about that. And some closer sounds here, so like wood pigeon sounds, rustlings in the park. And now basically I'm just going to dump them all in. So we're going to pull all this up, drag it in. Let's start with this one. Now, what I'm going to tell you about this quick layout is I'm not going to teach you how to do digital production. I'm just going to show you my own process because I'm very aware that there are so many other incredible resources to draw upon if you're interested in sound design and the actual techniques of doing that. Instead, I'm just going to show you basically how I think about designing a work visually and sonically and kind of walk you through those steps. But I'm not going to teach you about EQ or any like specific things that are inbuilt in sound design and this particular piece of software. Instead, I'm just going to talk about what I kind of think of. So then what I'll do is I'll listen to everything. I already did beforehand, which is how I discarded some not as good recordings. Okay, I'm going to do a quick run through, check how everything's going. Great. All right, so I'm just going to now drag everything in, and you are going to see me basically move things around for the next couple of seconds, which we are going to fast forward through because you do not need to hear that. Okay, so now you kind of have everything roughly placed in its section. What I'm going to do is think about the movement between the sounds. What sound do I want to cut from each long recording, if the recording is long? For example here, so I have, right here, the sound of wood pigeons, which I collected in the Jardin des Plantes. Right, and they're going cuckoo, coo, 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 coo.
do you want to keep the whole thing or do I want to cut it? Well, for me, I am going to just experiment. Just going to see what I can do with the sound. So I'm going to cut this little bit out that I want. Going to move the rest that I'm not using down there. And just going to play around with it. And because I'm not teaching you the specifics of sound production and how to use all the different things here, and how to use all the different functions in it, if you don't know what a button is on your piece of software, or you're just about to learn, just press on it. Honestly, that's what I did. Just press on it, give it a try. It might work, it might not. Play around with the settings, get to understand the different mechanisms that occur, and then you'll see how that affects the sound and see if that's something you want. And then we'll move from there. And now you're just going to see me whiz through and kind of do this with everything. Okay, so what's happening here is I'm kind of listening to everything, and as I'm listening, kind of mentally doing that sound painting exercise that we did and thinking about what kind of texture of sound could flow well into another. And here I've decided these kind of church bells are kind of a great way to start the piece. So you can imagine this either as a soundscape, which is what we're designing here, or as something that's happening in real life with instruments. Imagine like a percussionist just playing bells at the beginning, kind of silently, just breaking the sound, right? But it's rhythmic. It's something that calls your attention, something that brings you into the sound world of this piece. So that's what I'm going to do here. And what's going to happen is I'm just going to write maybe a 1 minute. Let's see how long that is. So, yeah, let's see, 1 or 2 minute sound design for you, and then show you what that kind of looks like at the end. And then we're going to see how that goes. So what's happening is we've kind of done a sound painting, but visually wise, but that's using sound, that's like kind of plotting where it could be. Now, okay, so all that has happened is that basically just spent the last like half an hour to hour listening closely to the sounds, cutting it up, plotting them out on this particular piece of software. And again, any other piece of software will work. This might seem like really basic and really odd to just be like not fiddling around with all the specifics of the sound and just kind of taking my time to draw out the aspects of the field recording that I'm really interested in. So
For example, you're going to hear it back in the moment, the kind of finished draft sketch that lasts about 2 minutes. Kind of thinking about, how do I want to play between different sounds? How do I want them to move? Where do I want to place them? What sounds did I cut and take out? And this will extend over time. It's not the full completed piece. It's kind of the first step to a piece. And it's just so you can get your ears in the place where you can think about how you want to shape certain sounds. Where do you want the silence to sit? Which is actually quite an important consideration when you're working with this kind of work. And I hope that this has been interesting for you. I hope that this has been a good start to think about just going for a walk and recording some sound and kind of playing around with it and seeing where it could creatively lead to. Maybe this has sparked some of your interest about kind of what kind of questions about sound you could ask, and as a result, how those research questions, even if they're coming from places that seem totally far-fetched, like archaeology and biology, how they could lead you into making an immersive soundscape. And here I'm going to leave you with what we have kind of roughed up today across our field trip and this afternoon, sitting here with this laptop, ordering sound and cutting up sound, and moving into how these different techniques, what kind of works they could potentially inspire you to create. So I've had the best time working on this 4-week little mini course and conversation with you all. I hope that it has sparked some new ideas about listening, and I really hope that now you'll listen to even the smallest of worlds. So thank you so much for joining with me as I've spoken about deep listening, listening backwards and forwards, and different ways of making music through sound, and different ways of hearing. All the best.